With the Overwatch League now less than 1 week away from returning, I think it's time for me to reveal my 2020 preseason power rankings. I've decided to do this now so that you all have a chance to debate my opinions for a few days before the season starts, but I am still planning to upload the remaining team previews throughout this week, so keep an eye out for those. With the league going global this year with the new homestand model, and also the introduction of hero pools on the horizon, I for one am very excited to see what's going to happen, even if these new variables have made it personally a little bit harder when trying to evaluate each of the teams. Of course, I should make the point that this list is just my opinion. It's a guarantee that most of you will have different opinions and rankings to mine, and I'd love to hear your takes down in the comments below. But please remember to be respectful, as at the end of the day, no one can say with certainty what's going to happen. I would also like to quickly clarify that this is just my power rankings for the start of the season. If you're new to the channel, you should know that I like to update my power rankings weekly once the season starts, so don't take this as my prediction for where the teams will finish at the end of the season. Rather, just how I rate them heading into 2020, although you can expect a season predictions video very soon. With all that out of the way though, let's properly get into my power rankings, and to everyone's surprise, at number 20, I have the Boston Uprising. I don't really have too much to add to what most of the community and analysts have said about Boston so far this off-season. It's not like I hate everything they've done, with the acquisition of Myeongbong, one of the top flex supports from contenders available, being an amazing signing. And around him there are some other pieces I like, such as Fusions for his leadership, and the underrated DPS talents of Colorhex. The Uprising have kept to their philosophy of bringing in lesser known players whose potential they think can be incredible with some development, and these past 2 seasons have highlighted both the positives and negatives of this approach. But just on paper, a lot of these players, to me at least, just seem average at best, and that's before I even mention that a lot of them are obviously unproven at this level. This brings me on to what the brackets beside their placement symbolise. This is what I perceive to be the team's rough ceiling and floor at the start of the season. For me, I just can't visualise Boston as anything better than a bottom 5 team, and considering that I just prefer everyone else's roster more than theirs, it's left me with no choice but to put them at 20. At 19, again I share the opinions of many others, as I have the LA Valiant. This off-season for the Valiant has just been odd. They started with a team that had respectable quality and looked to be making steady improvement, but then blew it up entirely, letting go of all of their stars and replacing them with largely unproven players of potential. Without a doubt, the organisation has taken the budget approach, but whilst this means that in my opinion they'll decline in quality, that's not to say that some of their new pickups aren't actually really good. The pickup I like the most is KSP, perhaps a bit of UK bias, but both at the World Cup and at the Gauntlet for XL2, he's been very impressive, and I'm excited to see how he matches up to those at the Overwatch League level, especially on Widowmaker. Like the Uprising though, I just don't see this team playing at a level better than outside the bottom 5 when the season starts, but when I compare these two sides, not only do I have more trust in packing 10 and the Valiant to unlock their players' potential, compared to Huck and Boston, but I also think the Valiant DPS players of KSF, KSP, Apply and Shax are a much stronger group than Colorhex, Jerry and Munchkin, and that's why I've put the Valiant above the Uprising, although both of these teams are clearly in a sort of bottom 2 tier. This brings me on to number 18, and probably the first team whose position I expect some people will complain about, as I have here the Dallas Fuel. Let me start by saying what I like about this team. Gamsu taking OGE's spot, whilst not necessarily having the same peak of quality, should bring in a calmness, experience and leadership I don't think the Fuel have had since the departure of Custer. Alongside him, I think that Decay and Doha have the potential to make a really nasty DPS duo that could propel this team to an impressive level. However, the reason I have them closer to their floor right now and not near the peak of their potential comes down to 2 factors. The first is no to off-tank. With hero pools near to implementation, I'm not at all confident in his ability to flex off of D.Va. It's not that he can't do it, as in the past we have seen showings of him on heroes like Zarya and Hog, but on both of these occasions he's not looked comfortable at all. And whilst I expect Gamsu to be consistently good, I reckon that because of Note, this tank line is going to be rather average at best, especially considering what I saw to be a decline in Note's D.Va last season as well, which even though he's now reunited with Gamsu, I don't expect to improve massively. The second reason for why I have the fuel so low is because I worry about the potential for inconsistency at DPS. Decay, Doha and Zachary all have tremendous upsides, but in the cases of Decay and Zachary, they haven't been able to consistently produce this quality on stage in 2019. Whilst for Doha, it's hard to say how the rotation of hero pools will affect his performances, given that he's quite specialised on a limited number of DPS heroes. Add into the mix what I think is just an okay support line, and the fact that I simply can't trust the field to get things right with their players, leaves me with no choice but to place Dallas at 18th, with their high number of homestands probably having to be an advantage they utilise to the fullest if they want to reach their ceiling. From the fuel at 18, I potentially might be surprising people again at 17, as this is where I've placed the Toronto Defiant. In terms of picking up fan favourites and marketing, Toronto have undoubtedly been big winners this off-season, but there's just something about this team that doesn't feel right. On paper their DPS line could be really strong, with Logic, Shawfar and Agilities, but when I think about the latter two more closely, I get the sense that people are putting too much stock into their inaugural season performances, rather than reflecting on much less impressive and more inconsistent 2019 campaigns. I also believe that too many people are overrating the impact that both Nevix and Kariv are going to have on this team. Everyone has been praising Nevix so much of late, but there really isn't too much for us to go on, aside from the hype and promising soundbites. And whilst he might have thrived in the shock environment before, it's hard to tell how he's going to perform with this new level of responsibility on his shoulders, without an alternative behind him. Kariv, meanwhile, I expect to play well, but let's not get too carried away with his recent stretch of games on Ana, as I think he can be a bit streaky with his displays. At main tank, Beast feels like a complete coin flip. He'll have to play well from the outset, as he's another who has no backup behind him. And whilst Kellex impressed recently at the Overwatch World Cup, that's probably the best I've seen him play in a long time. Overall, I think if everyone performs at their best from minute 1 and the team gets a bit of momentum, they could potentially even have a higher ceiling than what I've put down for them right now. But I think they'll lose a couple of early matches, and I worry that when this happens, this squad without much depth or alternatives at tank and support isn't best set up to deal with a negative environment which could completely derail their season very early on, and that's why I have them so low. We return to Texas now at 16 with the Houston Outlaws. Like Toronto and Dallas, I've seen lots of people place Houston quite highly in their own preseason power rankings, and I can completely understand why this is. Reuniting Jex and Repel would appear to add more stability at the support line, whilst the acquisition of Meko marks a huge upgrade over their previous off-tank options, not forgetting the hype surrounding Harsher becoming the head coach as well. However, if I tackle the support line first, whilst they may have been impressive in the past, Repel has only looked fine when he's had the occasional opportunity to showcase his talent on Vancouver. Meanwhile, it looks to me like a lot of people seem to be massively overhyping the pickup of Jexa. I watched Seoul enough last season to say with certainty that he really wasn't that impressive at all. His lauded shot calling skills didn't seem that noticeable, but he performed worse than Toby at Lucio, and even at times made him look not half bad on Mercy by comparison. He's an upgrade over Boink, no doubt, and I hope that alongside his old partner again he can improve his level of play on stage, but that's not a guarantee, especially as he's going to play alongside Raucus as well, who I expect will get a decent amount of playtime himself, being subbed in for Repel. And whilst his Ana has been impressive of late, he still has to convince me when he plays on Zen. If I now shift gears to Meko, he's another who I think I undervalue more than others. He ended last season strongly with some impressive Sigma displays, but for most of the regular season, I felt that his quality on D.Va was actually declining compared to his peak in Season 1. Add to that my lack of confidence in his ability to flex onto Hogan's area, with Spree being the only alternative, and you can perhaps see why I'm hesitant to be overjoyed at this move, even though he's clearly strides better than what they previously had. The DPS line is a hard one to evaluate for me, as it's hard to see how it's all going to gel together. In a Sombra or Tracer meta, you would imagine that Dante will get the nod, but then who beside him will be played? Lynx has certainly declined last year, and I'm not sure I can trust him to have a bounce back season, whilst Blase and Hydration seem to get in the way of one another, with only one of them seemingly being needed on this squad given their overlapping hero pools. And if they split playtime, I'm concerned that it could stop either of them gaining a solid amount of momentum. That said, I think this group's flexibility could come in handy as the season progresses, and with them I think Moomra is an okay option at main tank, which could make this a good playing caliber team. But right now I think they struggle early on meshing together as a mixed roster, and this becomes a greater challenge, as following the departure of Jake, I struggle to see a leader or leading figure who can make sure that they're all on the same page. It's these early bumps in the road, combined with my lower expectations for their new pickups, which is why I have the Outlaws so low right now. And whilst I quite like Harsher coming in as head coach, it's way too early to tell how impactful he's going to be, and indeed how he manages this team if things start to look a little shaky. This brings me on to my number 15 team, the London Spitfire. It's no secret this team has massively downgraded this offseason compared to the roster they've had over the past 2 seasons, but I think spending too much time focusing on that aspect makes you forget to look at this new roster fairly. Like the Valiant, they've certainly taken an approach of signing cheap talent with potential that they hope to foster, but compared to the Valiant, I have a lot more confidence in the coaching staff of Agape, Pavane, Twinkle and Awesome Guy to succeed in developing this young talent. Unlike the teams below them, a lot of London's additions are complete unknowns, such as Sanguinar, Babel and Although, and some I'm a lot more hesitant about, like Shui, Hylia and Fuse, with all 3 having had mixed showings in the past. However, I'm very excited to see what a tank line of JMac and Bernard can bring to the table, given the promise they've shown in contenders up to this point, whilst I genuinely believe Gliss is going to be a Rookie of the Year candidate and become a superstar, having looked like one of the top prospects coming out of Korean contenders. And also a quick mention of Jihoon, who legit looks like the Korean version of Armin, and could prove to be the team's secret weapon as the season progresses. Whilst you could draw parallels to the moves Florida took in 2019, and I won't deny that the unproven and inexperienced nature of this team could see them crumble under pressure, on paper I think the Spitfire's roster has been constructed more carefully, and whilst I don't necessarily see the ceiling at the start of the season to be necessarily as high as Houston or Toronto, I still can see them competing at a play-in level. I've ended up finding myself less concerned by their unknowns compared to my perceived problems of teams like Houston, Toronto and Dallas, and that's why I've got them just ahead of this trio, although it was a really close call to make. Just to reiterate that statement, Really, the teams from 13 to 18 in my power rankings I think are closely aligned to one another within their own tier. So whilst I think London just pip Houston, Toronto and Dallas right now, it's not like they're ahead by much, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if this ordering changed somewhat within the opening couple of weeks. If anything, considering the level of teams that are here, highlights how the quality of the league as a whole has definitely upgraded this off-season. The same can be said for probably my most controversial placement yet, of the Paris Eternal at 14th. To be very clear, I will happily take this one on the chin if its positioning backfires, but I legitimately think people have been too quick to write off Paris as an awful team, with their only hope being Sparkle later in the season. I recognise that there are definitely issues, such as at main tank, but under the guidance of their new head coach Rush, I think the Eternal are going to be a bit of a surprise package come the start of the season. Whilst Ben Best and Nosmite are not the best options at all, I have confidence that Smex or Hambin will be able to elevate the tank line to being at least average, given the strong recent performances that have been shown by the pair at off-tank, and I also suspect Nosmite will demonstrate that he's much better than what he's displayed in the past. While the support situation was inconsistent and messy in 2019, I actually think the flexibility and options available to this team with a diverse selection of FD God, Hip, Cruz and Grape could actually be very beneficial to them in terms of selecting a more conservative or more aggressive approach. Not forgetting also that the pairing of FD God and Hip returned to the league on the back of a surprisingly impressive performance at the Overwatch World Cup for France. Then you get to the DPS line, and I'm just going to come out and say it. I think Soon is the best DPS player right now on any of the teams I have ranked from Paris downwards, even if Glister's future potential is higher. All the talk about waiting for Sparkle, people are forgetting how nasty Soon could prove to be if he's let loose on heroes like Widow or Tracer, and whilst his potential short-term partner of Nico might not be rated that highly, I just have a hunch that with either Nico or Exi, that the Eternal will get things to work out and run a more effective DPS duo than most are currently predicting. A lot of this thinking I believe comes from the surprise package of France for the World Cup. It's obviously not the same team, but two of the most important members of FD God and Soon are, and I think Rush may initially try to blend a team identity using the sorts of things Team France ran with what he's previously done with Element Mystic. I will admit this positioning is more of a gut feeling than anything else, but we will learn very quickly what sort of level Paris are playing at, with early matches against Toronto and London, which will determine whether there's some sense to my madness. But because I see them winning both of these upcoming series, I have no choice but to place the Eternal ahead of both of these teams. Rounding out this sort of tier of teams in the lower middle pack is the Florida Mayhem at 13. Again, this is another team I think some may believe is a little too high, but for once I like the direction the Mayhem are heading in and what they've done this off-season. They haven't completely overhauled their roster, but I reckon the additions of Yaki and Gangnam Jin as well as Kuki at head coach are very significant. Rewatching the Gauntlet, I think both of these players were brilliant for Runaway, and I think they will slot in really nicely into what was an improving side that is starting to build momentum. Yaki finally gives Sire Player a quality partner beside him who can take away some of the attention and focus, which in turn should allow Sire Player to flourish even more, making Florida's DPS position one to certainly keep an eye on. Gangnam Jin meanwhile should be able to carry what was a subpar support line last year, although I would say Chris did improve as the season went on, and if he can elevate his play with a top flex support beside him, then this area of the squad could be another positive for them this season. If anything, aside from Chris, my only major concern with this squad is a few questions I have at tank. Without doubt, people have been over-exaggerating how good Gargoyle is, based purely on how strong his Hulk was. That said, I think people forget that he put in some solid displays on D.Va as well, so I think he'll be a solid option. The other question you have to ask is how well Fate's going to perform, and with less responsibility now on his shoulders, due to the team now becoming a lot more balanced overall, I think he's in the best position he's been in for a while now to play freely, and not feel under pressure to be the team's most important member. Perhaps this is me being overly optimistic, but I don't see any glaring problems facing me with this squad. There are still weaknesses, sure, but unlike some of the teams below the Mayhem, I actually saw gradual improvement in these areas of weakness in 2019, and I think with a firm direction and lead being put in by Kuki, this could be the year Florida aren't just seen as a meme, but instead a real challenger for the players as a middle of the pack side. Next at 12 I have the Chengdu Hunters. Just like last year, I found it hard to position the Hunters in terms of these power rankings, as they're just so different to everyone else. I think my ceiling and floor range kind of highlights my indecision with what I wanted to do with this team. All in all, I really like this squad. They've kept on the majority of what they had last year, whilst also bolstering their depth, with 18 coming in as a more assured main tank alternative, whilst the Hunters now also have a second support duo option, with Molly and Lengsa, both coming from LG Huya. Of course, the spotlight among these new players will be firmly placed on Leaf, who every time we've seen him play for Team China up to now, has wowed and impressed us with his DPS talents. Just thinking about what he might be able to do alongside Jinmu, especially within Chengdu's unorthodox system, makes me incredibly excited to see this team in action. And just on paper, highlights that in terms of their players, this team has certainly levelled up. But the reason I have them at 12, rather than placing them higher, is for two reasons. The first being the chaos that the coronavirus has brought. This team has the most Chinese players, and I do have some concerns that they may be a little stressed at what is currently going on, especially as they are remaining within China for the time being. The second reason though is far more significant, and that is my worries about this team losing RUI at head coach. RUI had demonstrated how talented of a coach he is by leading the Hunters last season between very successful World Cup outings with Team China. It's hard to say how important he was in helping these players develop their unique play style, and with him now stepping down, there is a seed of doubt in my mind that Chengdu may actually take a step back this season and end up performing at a level we expected at the beginning of 2019, so this is a placement I expect to be quite volatile. Rounding out the bottom 10, I have the Washington Justice at 11. I think that at their best, Washington have the potential to challenge for a playoff spot in 2020, which is why I understand why some people are placing them within their top 10s. But a lot will rest on the shoulders of the players around Corey to contribute effectively if this is to come to fruition. I would be very surprised if Corey declined this season from his new superstar status, but it's the pieces around him I think we need to be focused on. I like a lot of the moves the Justice have made this off-season, but I do think there is a risk that there will be volatility and inconsistency at both tank and support, with Raw, Lulsish and Elivo still not winning me over completely, whilst a lack of depth behind Ark and Aimgor feels somewhat risky. This is why right now I wouldn't be able to rate them inside the top 10, as there's too many questions that need answering with performances on stage before I can fully get behind this team again. I think it's important to point out that whilst this team did go 6-1 in Stage 4 last season, their strength of schedule wasn't the strongest, and I worry that people are getting too caught up with Corey's performances and the team's Stage 4 record without looking at this wider context. For sure, Washington have promise, and their high number of homestands could be a major benefit for them. But right now, for me, I think they're going to fall short of being a true playoff contender, as I don't think Corey can carry them that far, which is why I have them solidly just taking a play-in spot for now. We now will get to enter the top 10, and here I'm going to start with the Hangzhou Spark. Unlike a lot of the teams, the Spark have made a really big point about keeping the core of their 2019 roster together, rather than making major changes, and because of this they keep the synergy that all their players will have developed with one another, which I think will be a significant advantage early on this season. While some teams will be scrambling to develop teamwork, communication and coordination at the start of the season, a task that will probably be made harder by the brutal travel schedule, the Spark can be comfortable knowing that unlike last year, this is not a period of development this team will need, with a lot of these players having played with one another since even before they entered the Overwatch League. So in the first couple of months, this pre-made synergy could prove to be a difference maker for them. Add to that the strength of their tank and support lines with players like Guangzhou and IDK, as well as their new flex support signing Coldest, and I can understand why a lot of people have placed them within inside their top 5. The reason I have them at 10 though, is because of their DPS players. The more and more I look at the group of Dora, Bazzi, Godsby and Sasset, the more and more I hate it and think this team will struggle to match up to those I have ranked above them. Godsby is good, no doubt, but he's not a star level player like Prophet who can carry their partner if required to, and considering how important I think the DPS position is going to be this season, I just can't place the Spark any higher than I have them right now, especially when I also think that a lot of the teams above them have made more progress this off-season with the significant additions they have made. The DPS conundrum is the same reason why I now have the Gladiators coming in at number 9. On paper, their tank and support lines easily promise A-grade caliber displays, considering the star talent of OG in space, as well as the consistently strong displays that Big Goose and Shaz have shown over the past 2 years. And their DPS options have the potential to round out the squad quite nicely as well. But this is just potential. When I think about their DPS trio, I have the most confidence in Mirror to step up and be the main man, but I can't say the same for Birdring and Jaru. Just like Hangzhou, the more and more I look at this DPS line, the more I come to hate it, and think that the risk of it imploding is far greater than its chance to take the league by storm. Then when I add to the mix the real possibility that both OG and Space failed to take off themselves, and I just can't consider placing the Gladiators any higher. I think that their ceiling and floor range highlights everything you need to know about this team. They have the potential to be a top 5 team, but at the same time they could definitely implode and be a major disappointment. But right now I'm on the fence, and that's why I'm placing them in the middle of the pack. With the teams from 8 onwards, I think we come to those that have the greatest and most reliable chances of competing for a playoff spot. And starting us off is the Guangzhou Charge. Unlike Sideshow, I'm not completely in love with this team, but I do think it's solidly set up at every position. Their DPS line is unquestionably stacked, and in the era of hero pools, the flexibility and overall quality of Happy, Eileen and Nero could make this side a really tough opponent for whoever they face. I don't think Ro is a top tier main tank, but a consistently good performer who provides stability on the front line, and whilst it was a shame they lost Hotbar, I do think Krong will make a good replacement, having shown a lot of promise and potential in Korean contenders for O2 Blast. Their support line has perhaps the biggest question mark of the entire squad, with the choice of either Neptuna or Chara not exactly winning me over, but alongside Shu, again this should make for a good backline. If it's not clear already, I think the best way to describe this team is very good, but not yet great. For me, they clearly distinguish themselves as above the teams I have placed below them, but I'm not completely convinced they can consistently challenge those above them, and that's why at the moment they are almost like my playoff gatekeepers of this spot. My number 7 team may surprise a few of you, as unlike a lot of other people's power rankings, I have here the Shanghai Dragons. Most people would put Shanghai within their top 5s, and again, I understand the logic behind this. I think their support line is really promising, with Li Jaegong coming in at main support with either Luffy or Izayaki behind him. Their DPS on paper also look really impressive, with Ding and DM being joined by Fletter and their new rookie Lip, who has shown flashes of brilliance up to this point. Unlike others though, I still have big problems with this team's tank line. The choices of Void and Geguri at off-tank are okay, but don't stand out as impressive, and I'm certainly not convinced by the main tank options of Stand 1 and Fearless, with the former looking average at best within the contender scene, and the latter still needing to prove himself at the Overwatch League level. This is the primary reason why I have the Dragons so low, and I'm definitely not putting faith in their showing at the Shanghai Masters, aside from it highlighting that as a squad they were building up some good synergy. This isn't the only reason why I have them at 7, and behind the 6 teams above them, as I think people are over-exaggerating the quality of this DPS line. Sure, it has the potential to be absolutely stacked and insane, but what's to say that Fletter won't disappoint again this season, as he did in 2019, and indeed with DM and Ding, whether they become a little one-dimensional again. With hero pools coming very shortly, I feel like all their DPS options will need to be on form for Shanghai to succeed against their very best teams, but for now I'm just a little hesitant of that happening. If the whole squad can get a bit of momentum, you might make a case that they could find themselves within the top 3, but with now the early season coronavirus complications facing them, alongside these other concerns of mine, I don't feel I can place them any higher. Above them at 6 I have the Seoul Dynasty, a decision that by looking at everyone else's power rankings, I'm in a minority by placing them this high. The question of trust I'll get onto later, but for now I just want to go through this squad as objectively as possible. At the DPS line you have Prophet, Fitz and Illicit. I understand a lot of people want to see Prophet and Fletter play alongside each other, but I think too many people are underrating the quality of Fitz, who really shined as one of the Dynasty's strongest players towards the end of last season, and the potential of their duo, Prophet, looks to be incredibly high. When I move on to the tank line, Marvel and Michelle again last season impressed as a reliably consistent quality duo, not the best by any means, but way above average in every meta they played in, with Marvel in particular universally impressing. Whilst Gesture may have struggled a bit lately, I can't see how he really diminishes from this group as a whole, and could be used as a good alternative in certain measures and situations. At support there are a lot more unknowns. Toby is okay at Lucio, but if Mercy comes into the meta then I would be quite concerned, and it's hard to say how strong the flex support position will be, with Creative only really showing the potential at contenders level, whilst Bedosian has been a bit mixed in his own performances of late. As a collective though, I genuinely believe this to be a really strong team, with only slight, not major concerns compared to the likes of the Gladiators and Spark. I don't quite see why so many people consider them a bottom 10 side. In terms of them being the sole Spitfire, if anything that means they should improve on what they've been in the past. Maybe London haven't been consistent, but they've always somehow managed to put together a playoff level regular season record. As to why I have the Dynasty above the Dragons and Charge, I think it overall comes down to having a stronger squad with as much potential. The questions I have about Shanghai's tank line are far greater than the ones I have about Seoul's support line, and with Prophet joining the side, I believe the Dynasty have the greatest starting DPS duos of all 3 of these teams. I won't rule out Seoul disappointing again, but I think there's a real possibility that the support line is better than people think, whilst I think there's a genuine possibility that if the duo of Prophets goes nuts, you could see Seoul becoming a top 5 team. For now, placing them as sort of an even playoff level with the Dragons feels like a fair assessment to me. The Philadelphia Fusion at 5 are one of the most interesting teams, at least for me, heading into the 2020 Overwatch League season. I think that it's pretty clear that if you take the most likely starting 6 for Philadelphia, you have on paper potentially one of the strongest teams in the league. Carpe and Eco on form are a great DPS duo. Fury is one of the best off-tanks in the game, and in Alarm and Funny Astro, you have the makings of at least a top 3 support line. It's quite clear that if everyone's firing on all cylinders, they legitimately could be a major competitor to win the Overwatch League outright. Considering that Shadow is the only recognisable major weakness for this side, or at least the one that everyone immediately turns to, should highlight the quality this team has assembled around him, particularly at support and off-tank. That said, I hesitate a little at DPS, as I myself don't want to fall into the trap of rating Carpe and EQO too highly based on only their 2018 season performances. However, I do think it's more likely than not that we see them improve this year, and at the same time I think Philly have a lot of interesting pivots through their alternatives of Hisu, Ivy and Chipser, which could come into play here. I do see potential hurdles down the line though if Shadow does disappoint again, or if any of their other star players like Fury or Alarm underperform, and that's why I can't confidently put them right at the top alongside teams like San Francisco or New York. But for once, I think that the Fusion could actually be a much more reliably consistent team of quality that I think should find itself within the top 5, and that's why I have them at this position currently, although as my floor rating would suggest, I wouldn't completely rule out a much more disappointing outcome should the issues I've mentioned surface. Next at number 4, I place the Vancouver Titans. This positioning largely boils down to a sense of respect for the talent of this squad, as although like others I do have major concerns, I think too many people are quickly writing off how good this team should still be. Of course, these concerns are primarily about how Fisher fits into the lineup following the departures of Bumper and Tizzy. At this point, that's something that's really hard to evaluate. If everything clicks together with Fisher at main tank, then this team could genuinely get even better, utilising fully the type of aggressive play that Fisher can bring to the table. However, there is equally, if not a more likely chance, that he ends up having a large negative impact on the lineup's coordination, and this in turn could lead to Fisher becoming a toxic element for this team, which would be disastrous as he has no backup behind him. As for the signing of Jaehong, I think it's a bit overblown, as I expect him just to ride the bench and take a leadership role behind the scenes, which should be a positive. Aside from main tank though, the rest of his team is still full of class. The DPS line of Haxel, Stitch and Xiaomin Stu is still one of the strongest and most flexible in the league. Janu makes for a top tier off tank, and the support line of Slime and Twilight should continue to be one of the most consistent performing aspects of the Titans in 2020. This is why for now I think the numbers 4 spot suits them quite nicely. If things click with Fisher, they could immediately propel themselves into the top 2, but I just don't think that's likely. Instead, I have enough confidence in their players' quality to see them still make the playoffs, but if Fisher was to implode again, there is a real possibility that the Titans end up being an inconsistent, middle of the pack side, which is why I have their floor so low. Entering the top 3, I'll start with the Atlanta Reign. The Reign in my eyes look to be in a really strong position heading into 2020. The DPS position group has the potential to be one of the strongest in the league, following the signings of Edison and Sharp, who alongside Ursa and Babybay make an incredibly scary unit. Whilst I initially had my concerns about the lack of depth at support, the team have now gone and bolstered with the additions of Fire and Kodak, who alongside Master and Dogman I think cover any situation in terms of hero pools or style they want to run. The only slight questions might be at tank. I don't have a problem at all with Pukpo or Gator, but I definitely could see FRD or Hawk potentially being the weak point on this roster, especially if Diva is the number 1 off tank. Although outside her, I think this tank line can successfully adapt to any meta put in front of them, which could see them thrive with hero pools. I would be wrong to ignore the possibility that Atlanta may start the season with a couple of growing pains as their new pieces fit in and gain experience, but if all 3 areas of their roster play up to their potential and improve upon the displays they showed towards the latter end of last season, then without a doubt, the Reign can be considered a team that could make waves through far more consistent quality displays. In my mind, they are not only a good bet for the playoffs, but perhaps even an outside challenger to win it all. But should similar, emotional demons return from 2019, then they might end up repeating what they showed throughout last season, hence why I have their floor quite low. It's some minor questions I have at tank, and the potential for this team to be a little emotionally volatile that prevents me from putting them inside the top 2, but like a lot of analysts, I'm excited to see what this team can do once the season gets going. This leaves my top 2, which unsurprisingly given what's left, are the New York Excelsior at 2 and the San Francisco Shock at 1. Unlike the other teams, I don't think I need to spend too much time talking about these two really at all. For me, they're the 2 strongest squads in the league, with no discernible questions at any role. I can see why some are a little more hesitant about the Excelsior than I am, but I think they've proven over the past 2 years they are a great team in nearly every meta, which will benefit them tremendously in the era of hero pools. And I'm definitely someone who thinks a Hopper makes for an important upgrade at off-tank that makes this team much more flexible and adaptable moving forward, and that's why they hold off Atlanta. There's no way you could have them above the Shock, however. They come in as the defending champions, having kept their star-studded starting DPS roster intact, and they still are crusty at the reins. If you're trying to nitpick, you could perhaps worry about the loss of 9k and how that affects the coaching staff, but they've made an excellent addition of Arachne. And maybe you find it hard to say how Ans will fit in as seemingly just a Widow one-trick, but at the end of the day, this is just a fantastic roster that should see them as firm favourites to go on and win it all again, and that's why I have them at number 1, which seems to be the pretty unanimous view shared amongst everybody. With that though, we finally reached the end of my first Overwatch League 2020 power rankings, which I'll put on screen now. Again, be sure to let me know what you think of it, and indeed what your own opinions are. I know it won't take long for me to be proven wrong, but regardless, I'm excited to finally see the Overwatch League back. We've now just a few more days to go. If you have reached the end of this video though, then I'd like to thank you for watching. Again, like last year, I'll be updating my rankings on a weekly basis, so please be sure to like, subscribe and follow me on my Twitter or at my Discord so you don't miss out. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.